George R.R. Martin's back again to prove that he spends more time eating than thinking. He's written a blog post under the title Not a Blog, Witty, which includes what can only be thought of as an unhinged delusional rant, and talking about how miserable he is. Have you considered finishing Winds of Winter? The fans liking you for a change might actually improve your sense of self-worth. It has been over 4,500 days since your last one. Maybe it's time to pull your finger out, might make you feel a bit better. But I'm not here to talk about his terrible work ethic, or his humble brags. I am famous, I am wealthy, and supposedly I have a big platform, whatever that is. That's what you spend all your time sitting on, George. But what really got me is how he decides to treat the fans. Because we've already gone through this once, and now he's doubling down on it. George R. R. Martin says anti-fans rule social media and dance on the graves of movies that flop. It used to be fun talking about our favourite films. Yes, didn't it, George? I wonder what's changed.
I think the thing I'm most excited for you guys to see is Chalk Talk community, a Chalk Talk culture, and all of the ASL.
I think so many people feel like this project might be checking boxes in some way. I have a lot of hearing privilege.
Because he's already gone through this once, and I can understand saying something stupid once. It happens to everybody. But as time goes on, if you keep doubling down on top of your ignorance, there comes a point where you're like, you must understand. You can't be this thick. It must be malevolence. But then he writes a blog post that seems straight out of the mind of a deranged crackhead. And you're like, you're depressed. Mate, have you tried living in the real world? It's a lot better than the one you've invented in your own face. At this point, I'm not convinced he knows Game of Thrones is fantasy. It's like he just took imaginary events he thought was happening in the world, and then changed the names and added dragons. Although we might think dragons exist in real life, because judging by this diatribe, he spends most of his time chasing them.
So, what do you think?
I think it's a beautiful lie.
But before we dig into his modern accusations, where he talks about people taking delight in dancing on the graves of anyone whose film has flopped, this is why I don't think you can be that stupid. I can explain that in one clip. Police, get what you deserve! That's called justice, mate. Now, no, most people in Hollywood don't have a justice-based morality. It's a care-based one, otherwise known as evil. Oh, you can't be happy that it failed, even though it hates you, because they put a lot of work into that. Everything's equal. No, he should be allowed to say toxicity is growing in the anti-fans.
Some of the fan base just sicken me to my stomach. You're no Star Wars fan in my mind.
The Star Wars fan base really seems to be the most kind of toxic.
But don't you celebrate when any of his stuff fails. No, he's allowed to hate the fans as much as he wants, but you can't say anything about him. That's toxic.
I stand against hate.
I stand against hate.
I stand against hate.
But as he wants to reflect on the year that we've just lived through, I feel like to properly handle him doubling down, we need to remind ourselves about what he said about this last year.
How has everything become so toxic?
To be part of a redress of balance is an honor.
It used to be that if you were a fan of Star Trek, you liked Star Trek.
No money, socialist utopia thing turns out to be a fad.
Now it seems like half of the people who call themselves Star Trek fans hate Star Trek.
When you got your dramas, one of these days we'll repay you, we'll slay you.
And the Star Wars fans hate Star Wars.
I like to make men uncomfortable. I enjoy making men uncomfortable.
You're no Star Wars fan in my mind.
And the Tolkien fans hate Rings of Power.
I, as an activist,
we are both activists.
This represents progression. We don't change anything, but we interpret everything.
What the hell?
Every woman on the show, such agency. We don't serve the men around us.
Maybe it's because it's changing.
We have all new characters on this couch today, I think. We don't know who you guys are playing at all.
The opportunity to interpret and reinterpret it.
When words mean something different, rediscovering things.
We're creating something new. You have an opportunity to fill in the gaps and to make your own decisions.
You'd go crazy if you didn't change it somehow.
The cartoon was made 85 years ago. Therefore, it's extremely dated.
Focus on her love story with a guy who literally stalks her. Yeah. Weird.
I don't understand how people can come to hate something that they once loved.
Talking about colonization and history.
I have to do my best to make the story written work.
At the end of the day, this is a story of representation, and it matters.
This profession is a gambler's profession.
This represents an acknowledgement of where we have been and a will to get to where we need to be.
If you don't like a show, don't watch it.
Oh, I'm getting chills. I'm literally getting chills and tearing up.
Can do it too.
And we can do it, yeah.
But the thing that gets me about that is he answered his own question.
How has everything become so toxic? Maybe it's because it's changing.
Yes, maybe it is. But it's not that the story's advancing or that characters are being swapped out as actors move on to new things. It's that the entire moral structure of the entertainment has changed.
All of the people were angry.
Those people.
Variance
People that we
awakening
need
of-
to educate.
What used to be good is now evil, and what used to be evil is now good.
And what I see all over the place is people who care about looking good
while doing evil. Hey, Bob.
Comes from the idea that everything's equal. With equality, there's no hierarchy. That means there's no hierarchy of values you get rid of in reality, and now the bad guys are, for some reason, the good guys.
We'll pick our fight and give what we steal to our people.
That arrow I shoot at the bullseye. Had that boy running because he ain't a cool guy.
And the supposed villains of the show being the most moral people there.
You bring one more peasant into my penthouse, Chet, I will throw her off the balcony myself.
Entertainment changed from being entertaining to, I really need to change your mind about this thing, to educate you.
Love into awareness.
Love them in the right direction.
And that's an idea that George definitely subscribes to. In his blog, after he's talked about being famous, wealthy, and having a big platform, he says, I have grown more and more cynical about this supposed power that people keep telling me I have. They absolutely have an obsession with power. I guess because when everything's about self-interest, power enables you to get what you want, and George wants to reshape the world. Has anything I have ever written here changed a single mind or a single vote? Why would it, George? You write about dragons. What are you supposed to change people's minds on? That Kit Harington can't act?
Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to have sex with my brother.
Cut. Thank you.
I'm not even sure you're clever enough to do it. You've got a whole paragraph here about people invading nations, and yet in your own books, they had a massive ice wall to keep them out. I'm just saying you're sending mixed messages here, mate. I goes, I see no evidence of that. The era of rational discourse seems to have ended. But the interesting thing is when you talk about rational discourse seems to have ended, after your previous statement about having the power to change minds, your definition of rational discourse seems to be, I will present you with something, and then you agree with me. If you think I'm a lardass who doesn't know what he's talking about, it's just not rational discourse anymore. Because that is the idea of power and having a big platform. They don't think of rational discourse as, I just present my ideas to you, and then you do with them whatever you want. You agree with them or disagree with them, but that's on you. Now, he seems to have the idea that if you don't walk away from it agreeing with him, then having wealth and power is pointless, because he wants to change minds and votes.
At the end of the day, this is a story of representation, and it matters.
This seems to be especially poignant when combined with his next paragraph that kind of shows you where his mind is, that death is everywhere, all the writers that he's known and grown up with, his generation of science fiction and fantasy writers are gone or going. I think it's normal when you go along that track, you kind of think, well, what have I done? What was it all for? What have I left behind? What legacy have I created?
There was a lot of eating. There was a lot of food.
Normally this would be very easy to answer, you just point at your kids, but as George can't do that, he then projects outwards onto the world. If your kids can't leave the impact of your legacy, then you have to, and that means activism, because without that, he thinks everything will be forgotten in one way or another.
The industry talks a lot about identity.
It's no wonder then that he writes completely unhinged paragraphs about the state of the world, things which are far beyond him and his ability to impact anything. But the guy's 75, and let's be honest, when you're in that shape, that's a good innings.
Willow Ufgood here is terrified that one day he'll be discovered as the aging, talentless hack that he really is.
But when you don't have kids, you look for other things to change, even things that normally you just consider out of your reach, until you think you have something like a big platform. Not an IP that's beloved or a world that would be cherished by millions of people. No, now you have a platform, something to use to project your mental image out onto the world, a power to convince people.
And if I have to explode the engines and rupture this world and damn us all to hell, then I will!
And it's not just George that has this attitude, it's actually all throughout Hollywood. It's a human desire to build, create, and leave a legacy. And if you can't do it one way, you will look to use whatever is available to you to do it another. Using any IP you can get hold of as a platform to do it, like The Witcher did. Or explaining why there's so many movies about the protagonist with cats. It's not just so the audience can relate to it, but the writers projecting themselves out into the world because they can't in the usual manner.
What is it you like?
Nuts.
Because the lowly peasants need to learn from us, the aristocracy. Social media may have killed the movie star, but the movie star doesn't seem to have realised it yet. They're still living a couple of decades in the past, probably because of their pay packets. As much as they love to claim
starvation wages.
We will not allow you to take away our dignity!
That's definitely not the case. They think they're above the viewer base and above the source material. In The Witcher, some of the writers actively dislike the books and the games, even actively mocking the source material. It's a recipe for disaster and bad morale. Fandom is a litmus test that checks egos and makes all the long nights worth it. You have to respect the work before you're allowed to add to its legacy. That's what's missing in Hollywood now. Humility.
You do not get to choose.
It's my show.
I'm not about to let a man take credit for a woman's work.
The boy's magic.
No, this magic belongs to no boy.
If you think you're superior to history,
The cartoon was made 85 years ago, therefore it's extremely dated.
Talking about colonization and history.
It's to be part of a redress of balance. This represents progression.
if you think you're better than the very reason why you've got a job in the first place, and you don't care about it, you think you're better than it, and end up just putting you into it.
First ever female dwarf to ever truly be seen cinematically.
This may work for people like the Mary Sue, where they really love reader inserts, where she sees a woman with a cat trying to write, and she just thinks, that's definitely me. Though that's the minority of the people. They don't care about the writer, they don't care about the director, they don't care about the people in the cast.
We don't care what you would do, because we don't care about your life whatsoever.
When you're covering an IP, they want the IP. That's why it has fans in the first place. If you were talented enough to change it, you wouldn't be making that IP in the first place, because you would have made one of your own.
We don't change anything, but we interpret everything.
Instead, we get the talentless rejects who can't come up with anything original, thinking they're better than the people who did. Now that's where George at least gets some leniency. If he wants to change his own work, well, have at it, I guess. It's not like anyone could stop him. That'll get judged on its own merit. Although he'll get angry at that as well. In the very early seasons, Martin wrote and read scripts for Game of Thrones, consulted on casting decisions, and visited the sets. Over time, however, he stepped back to focus on his long-delayed next Throne novel. How's that been going for you then? And so Martin grew estranged from the show. By season 5, 6, 7, and 8, I was pretty much out of the loop, and when asked why, he didn't cite his work on Winds of Winter. Instead, he said, I don't know, you'll have to ask Dan and David. Maybe if you'd finished the books, they would have thought you had something to contribute. No, instead, it doesn't seem like he cares about finishing the book at all. He's done plenty of other things, worked on plenty of other TV shows. It just seems like he doesn't care about Game of Thrones, which is weird for somebody who would want to leave a legacy. If he actually cared about the IP, cared about the customers, he'd work to get that finished. When Robert Jordan realised that he wasn't going to make it to the end of Wheel of Time, he wrote the last chapter and a load of notes for the next author to finish his work, which was Brandon Sanderson. He left a lot of notes behind, wrote complete scenes in places, dictated other scenes. The prologue was almost completed by him. The ending scenes were written by him as well. And then you get George Martin, nearly 4,600 days without a book. Does that appear to you like somebody who cares about the IP and the world he's created? Or somebody that sees it a bit more commercially? Just as a platform to use for power to convince people who's annoyed that it isn't working. And so he gets annoyed as he hasn't left an impact on the world. He takes solace where he can. In Chocolate Thrones, in books, in films and television shows, although even there, toxicity is growing. It used to be fun to have spirited debates, although we found out he only seems to like debates where people end up agreeing with him. But now you can't say, I just didn't like it and here's why. That's weird. I can. You can too. In fact, you're the one who has a problem with people saying that. Because in your next sentence, now social media is ruled by anti-fans who would rather talk about the stuff they hate rather than the stuff they love. He's literally contradicted himself in 2 pissing sentences. In the age of social media, you can't just say, I did not like book X or film Y, and here's why. And why can't you say that? Well, it's because a load of people say that they don't like stuff, and that's toxic. This isn't a smart man. Toxicity is growing because he can't say he doesn't like something because so many people say they don't like something? Are you just a hipster that wants a different opinion? Or are you annoyed that the other people are saying they don't like things that you want them to? Because they're the ones that have the correct discourse. They're the ones that would change the minds. That people aren't falling for the messages that you want them to fall for. Is it just that they don't like the things that you want them to not like? And they dare have a different opinion about what they don't like compared to you? Because those peasants need to learn that message. Those peasants need to have their minds changed. And they delight in dancing on the graves of anyone whose film has flopped. Yes, the people who are changing the IPs. The people who see IPs as a platform. The people who don't seem to care about IPs, whether their own or even worse, other people's. Those are the people.
Police, get what you deserve!
Because you have to respect the work before you're allowed to add to its legacy. And they don't. They're just like you, George. They see it as a platform. They see it as a way to change the world. They see it as a way for them, personally, to be seen.
You know, she has 2 disabilities. She is deaf and an amputee.
That's a perfect example of how representation can have positive consequences, you know.
When no one cares about them.
Because we don't care about your life whatsoever.
It's so interesting to hear how you define the world. To hear that you want to say what you don't like, but it's toxic when anyone else does. Because you're famous, wealthy, and supposedly have a big platform. Because you have power, and I guess that means the little guys can't have an opinion, otherwise they're toxic. The problem is, George, the world that you say you want, you've killed it. You talk about how fun it used to be to talk about books and films and have spirited debates with people who disagree, but you're the one who doesn't want it. You want them to change their mind. You want to talk about things that you don't like. But the moment anyone else does, they're toxic. They need to shut up. They need to agree with you. You talk about the era of rational discourse seems to have ended when you seem to be one of the ones that have killed it. Because other people say what they don't like, and you could too. But the moment they have an opinion, you are out there calling them toxic. You're out there insulting them. And strangely, and you seem to be so amazed, so stunned, when any of the peasants dare talk back to you. How very dare they? Do they not know who I am? No, George, it's not that social media made things more toxic. It's not that people aren't aware that you're part of the aristocracy with a large platform and power. It's just that they stopped caring. The age of the celebrity really is dead, and you're one of the ones that killed it. And being a hypocrite about it isn't going to make that any better. But those are just my thoughts. What are yours? Let me know down in the comments below. Like the video if you like the video. Subscribe. More videos like this in the future, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.